Welcome to another episode of the Dan Norton Show. Today, I am here with Aaron Rabinowitz. Aaron, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Dan, thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. So before we get started, could you just tell my audience a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I am a moral philosophy professor. I'm currently working on a PhD in education with a focus in moral education. I've been teaching ethics courses of a variety of sorts for about at least 10 years. My particular interests are having to do with the issue of moral luck. This is the idea that it's sort of immoral to hold people responsible for things that are beyond their control. And it seems like everything might be beyond our control in the way that kind of matters there. So that's something that I do a lot of work on, and I'm interested in developing sort of educational theory that takes these issues and centers them more as a way to kind of develop compassion, that sort of thing. Other than that, I do Embrace the Void and Philosophers in Space, these two philosophy podcasts. I have a Skeptic Mag, the Skeptic Mag, the UK one. I have a monthly article with them. So I try to do a bunch of different like public philosophy to just try to help people think and talk more about ethics and try to sort of understand their lives a little better.
Okay. And I've seen some of your content. I watched you had a debates with Ben Burgess, which I watched on YouTube, and then I listened to one of your podcasts, and I read one of your articles on the UK websites. So when we were talking beforehand and settling on a topic, I think what we decided that we would talk about luck. You mentioned meritocracy. Later, determinism came up in our conversations, volitional control, free will, all that sort of stuff. So I don't have a super strict agenda that I want to get through, but those are, I think, the general topics that we said we would talk about. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Then from here onwards, it's going to be pretty free flowing. So we could start by, I could say some things about free will or in Ayn Rand's view of free will. I myself am heavily influenced by Ayn Rand and her philosophy of objectivism. Or you could lay out what your view of free will is, and then I could react to that. Let's see. Do you have a preference
I think, yeah, well, let me say, I think it might be worthwhile if we started with like, what are the stakes for declaring when someone has free will or not? Like, why does it matter to us? I mean, I know why it matters to me. I guess I'm curious why you feel like it's important to suss out who has free will and why.
Okay. So what is the importance of free will? I think
this helps shape the definition is why I ask.
Okay. So I think it's a fundamental fact about human nature that we have free will, that in other words, that we can make choices that were not determined. Now, I know that's already getting into controversial ground because many people, at least in the academic world, are what's called compatibilists. They think that you can both have free will and be determined. I don't
which
buy
I am
that.
not. I am not a compatibilist, but yes, that is correct.
So I don't buy the compatibilist view either, that free will and determinism are compatible. Determinism being the idea that everything is determined in advance. There's only one path in the future. Nothing could have happened differently than it did. So, you know, whether I turn out to be a mass murderer or a law-abiding citizen, that was all determined before my birth. So if that is your view, if you do accept determinism, then I think that's incompatible with free will. Now, some people also, there's a different sort of compatibilism. Some people will also say that determinism is not only compatible with free will, it's compatible with moral responsibility. So even if you are determined, even if there only is one path into the future, it still makes sense to think that there's something like moral responsibility, that people can be morally responsible for their actions. I
Right.
also reject that sort of compatibilism.
As do I at this point.
Okay. Now, from what I recall, there is what I would call a kind of compatibilism that you do subscribe to from our discussion in email, which is that you think that there can be such things as moral truths consistent with determinism. And you also think that it makes sense to use ought sort of language, like someone ought to do something, even if determinism is true. Now, I also reject those sorts of claims that there is a compatibility between ought statements and determinism, or moral truths in determinism. So I think that's one place where we would differ.
Yes, I agree. That is one place in which we would differ. Is that so? For your purposes, is your main concern when it comes to free will, does it boil down to concerns of moral responsibility, or are there other issues that you think are sort of lurking in the background when we are trying to assess whether someone has free will or not?
Moral responsibility is certainly a big one. I don't know that it's the only one. There's also something you might call epistemic responsibility. So are we responsible for the beliefs that we hold? You might see this as a subset of moral responsibility.
Indeed, I do. That is correct.
Okay. So in that case, it might not be a separate point, but just to make a little more explicit what it is that I have in mind, you could hold someone responsible for his actions, his existential actions in the world. So did you study hard for the test and then therefore get a good grade and deserve praise for doing that? Or did you fail to study for the test? Were you procrastinating on doing what you should have been doing, and therefore you got a low grade on the test and you deserve blame for that? There's also, so that's kind of involves existential actions that you might do. Pull out your book, spend some hours studying. But there's also the internal mental actions of managing your own mind. So are you choosing to think and focus your minds on the facts, or are you just allowing your mind to be buffeted around by emotional forces internal to you, and you're not really the one in control? So your mind is just drifting at the mercy of, it could be external things in your environment or just internal thoughts and emotions that you're having. Are you just in a state of drift, or do you seize the reins, the mental reins, so to speak, and guide the processes of your own mind? If you do seize the reins and guide your own mind, you might be said to be exerting epistemic responsibility, in the sense that you're controlling the process that eventuates in your having certain beliefs downstream.
And my understanding is from looking at the stuff that you sent me and from listening to one of your other conversations, Randists tend to try to locate free will in epistemic behaviors that they believe are volitional in a way that is sufficiently independent that it can ground responsibility. Is that roughly accurate?
Yeah, so it's a psychological notion of free will. The view is that it's not that we directly control our actions, or at least not, maybe I should say, we don't directly control our beliefs. Like, you can't directly choose to believe something, but you can control whether or not you choose to focus your mind or not. And if you focus your mind, that will lead you to have more reality-based beliefs, rather than if you let your mind drift in a state of unfocus, of non-alertness, then you'll more likely be guided by irrelevant considerations and come to less likely be, which will less likely result in holding reality-based beliefs. So
yeah, go ahead.
That's just kind of abstract. Maybe I can get into some more concrete examples of that either now or later, but I'll just pause there for now and see what you have to say about any of that.
Yeah, so usually at this point, I would want to make sure we were on the same page, I think, for defining control, since you repeatedly sort of used the idea of we are controlling our actions or choosing. in the right kinds of ways. I think, though, if we both believe that determinism is incompatible with free will, it's likely the case that we believe that a similar kind of control is needed. So I think we would both agree, for example, that like my ability to pick up a glass and put it back down doesn't prove that I have the kind of free will that is necessary for moral responsibility or responsibility more broadly. We would say that like it needs to be some kind of more robust kind of control, which I think ultimately we can chase it in circles a while, but I think it's ultimately going to boil down to like a libertarian, independent, internal self that you believe is willing your mind towards one thing or the other, and it is in some ways independent of the deterministic forces that drive everything in the universe. And that's where I think we're going to have our central point of disagreement. And I'm happy to like unpack the kinds of luck, specifically constitutive luck, that I think undercuts the plausibility of that kind of free will and therefore that kind of moral responsibility. But I think that's probably going to be our main crux of disagreement here.
Okay, so we both think that a certain is this what you're saying? We both are on the same page about a certain kind of control being needed that's contrary to determinism, if there is to be such a thing as moral responsibility, and I think that there is such a form of control, and you think there isn't. Is that a fair
Correct.
way of putting it?
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, let's. I think it'd be good to get into that some. So I think the primary evidence that there is a responsibility, a moral responsibility grounding sort of control that we have is introspective. I think that's the primary sort of evidence we have for it. We can just directly observe our mind controlling things, making choices. And let me give an example of this. So to use an example that Harry Binswanger, an objectivist philosopher, often gives, if I say Mary had a little, what word jumped into your mind? Well, lamb, right?
Lamb.
It just happened automatically. You had no control over that word coming into your consciousness. But if I now say what is 1852 times 36, does an answer automatically pop into your mind in the way that's lamb popped into your mind? Well, no. You could start doing work in your head. You could say, okay, well, the ones digit is 6 and 2. So if I multiply those, I get a 2 in the ones column and carry the 1. And you can go through this process. But at any moment, you can say, I'm going to stop. I'm not going to proceed with this. It's just too much work, or it's too much effort, or it's pointless. I'm going to do something else instead. So you can observe your mind putting forth this effort to solve this math problem or not. That is entirely up to you, in contrast to the case of the word lamb popping into your mind, which is not up to you. That's automatic. So we have introspective data such as this that tells us certain operations in our mind are operations under our control and certain ones are not. Now, the determinists will often come and say, well, this is just an illusion. Yeah, I grant you, it at least seems that we have some kind of control over our minds, but there's scientific evidence and arguments that we actually don't. Now, I've looked into some of the alleged scientific evidence, such as the experiments done by Benjamin Libet.
Yeah, I don't use the Libet argument at all. I think they're that's the wrong way to go in making these arguments entirely, but I'm familiar with what you're referring to. These are studies that suggest that like behavior begins before conscious decisions to act, essentially.
Right. So that's one sort of argument against free will and for determinism. But, determinists have been around a long time before Benjamin Libet, who was just, I guess he did his work in the 20th century, but there have been determinists long before that. So I think there are other reasons that have led philosophers throughout history to accept determinism. I think materialism or a mechanistic view of the world might be part of the reason. If you have a kind of billiard ball view of the cosmos, everything is just a bunch of atoms bouncing around, and humans are just big collections of these atoms. And since the atoms themselves don't have any free will, any combination of the atoms don't either. So that's another sort of argument someone could.
Right. And you're not rejecting determinism, are you?
I am rejecting determinism. I think
so
that's
you think there's a non-deterministic part of our universe somewhere?
Yes, our own minds.
How does it work?
Which I think, how does it work?
I mean, is it like, well, so here's a problem, right? Are you saying our minds are non-deterministic in a sense that like they're random, or are you saying they're determined but they're like unmoved movers in some way?
Not random, but I would say they operate by choice or decision. And I do
right,
but
we would agree that there's a version of choice that obviously doesn't involve free will, right? If I choose what I think is choose to grab something, but really I'm under mind control, or I'm I'm actually asleep or something like that. Who knows, right? Like there are situations in which like choice is not indicative of the kind of free will we have in mind here, it seems to me. Not to mention the challenges with like, what do we mean when we say choice? It's very difficult to explain because you can't choose to do otherwise, right? There's no evidence that there's a reality in which we did otherwise or something like that. We don't have access to alternative worlds or something. So all we have is the thing you did, and we have the reasons that you did it. And I think you believe that our minds are based on reason, or acts based on reason. So let me actually jump in with a couple of things based on what you were saying there. First of all, do we agree that introspection is fallible? That like I can be wrong about what's going on inside of my own mind?
Maybe if you mean introspection in a broad enough sense, I think there are certain things that you introspect that are very simple, like right now,
feeling pain.
Am I feeling pain?
Feeling pain is the classic
pleasant?
example of introspection that you can't be wrong about, where in the sense that like if you think that you're in pain, you are in pain. But when it comes to like knowing whether knowing the reason that I believe something, for example, like my reason for believing X, I can be wrong about my reason for believing X, right? I can think that I believe it because I'm noble and I want to believe this noble ideal, but I really believe it because it's self-serving, for example.
That's possible. Yeah, you can be mistaken about your beliefs. I think there are some cases where it's very easy to be certain of your reasons. So, why do I have fear of going to the dentist? Well, because I know that the last time I was there, it caused a lot of pain. I think there are some very straightforward cases of knowing what your reasons for having certain beliefs or emotions are. But there are cases where it's more complicated.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that like we weren't saying that like introspection is infallible, because that would be a very, very strong claim that would need like a lot of evidence. Now, I think at the end of the day, the better argument, so you got into like some of the determinism stuff a little bit. I don't think, and most people that I talk to who sort of share a view similar to mine when it comes to the free will stuff, we're not really interested in debating the physics and like whether the particles do X or Y or something like that. And I don't really think it's necessary. So I think most folks agree these days that if the universe was indeterministic, right, if it was like random, that wouldn't be any better, because it would mean that like everything was random. Like if you in theory, if you scaled it up, right, you would assume that like everything was random, and randomness would not be what we want when we talk about free will and moral responsibility, right? We want doing something for a reason that you chose in some way independent of the forces that rob other people of free will, right? And I think if you're really serious about the problem of moral luck, there's no such entity and no such choices ever being made. So just really briefly for folks who haven't read about this or aren't familiar, moral luck is a problem that was made very famous by, in particular, a guy named Nagel, And he basically says there are 4 kinds of moral luck. We need to worry about 3 of them in particular: consequential luck, which is the luck of how things turn out; circumstantial luck; and constitutive luck, which is the luck of who you are and what makes you up as a person. And basically the argument goes, you can try to avoid circumstantial and consequential luck by focusing all of your judgment inward on the person's choices, their reasoning, whatever, the stuff that you are doing here. Exactly. And then what he says is, but all of the choices that you make, whether it's thinking quickly or thinking slowly, are the result of factors beyond your control. And that if you really look inward and find all of the reasons for why you do the things you do, you will recognize that, like, there is no independent you there at the controls. There's just forces pushing on other forces. And I don't think that, like, short of just outright declaring the existence of a soul, there's any real argument against that position. So I'm curious to hear, like, what you think exists inside of you that escapes that problem, essentially.
Okay, just for the audience, you're referring to Thomas Nagel, not Ernest Nagel, who is also a philosopher.
Yes, no, Thomas Nagel. Right. Mortal Questions is the book, Moral Luck is the chapter. Yeah, so I think I'm curious how your independent self solves that problem.
Okay, so I don't think there is a Cartesian sort of soul that could exist independent of the body as a substance, you might call it. I think there is consciousness, and we have that's axiomatic. We have direct evidence.
Yeah. I'm pro consciousness too.
Okay, and we have evidence also direct of how that consciousness works and whether it is under our control. And that's what I was just pointing to a few minutes ago in talking about the example of Mary Had a Little Lamb versus doing this math problem in your head. You can directly observe that your consciousness is controlling that process. So that's right. The primary evidence. And you can say, well, maybe there was something unbeknownst to you behind the scenes that's
it's not the subconscious thing that I'm worried about. It's more every piece of the thing that you refer to when you say you in that sentence. So let's take the math problem, for example, right? What does it take for you to be able to do that complicated math problem?
Well, it takes some energy, for one thing. If you're too low on energy, like you haven't had food for a long time, you haven't had sleep, you might just not have the mental energy or stamina to go through with it. So I think having a healthy, intact, and sufficiently energized brain is one thing you need in order to be able to exert your volitional control.
What else would you need?
Drugs can help this. Certain drugs, they can make you more alert, more capable of exercising your volitional control. Right. And some are sedatives, which can have the opposite effects.
You'd also need, someone to have taught you math, right? You would need the time to sit down and do the thing because you're not busy doing something else because of whatever force pulling you in a different direction. All of the things that go into doing that thing are at the whim of forces beyond your control, right? Imagine that you were born in a country where they don't teach math, right? You would have no capacity to focus your mind and solve that math problem. This is very interesting in particular, I think, because as I understand it, Rand to some extent sort of liked to say that she was sort of fixing Aristotle, I guess, to some extent, or something like that, or Kant, some of those kinds of folks. Kant or Aristotle would sort of agree that, like, and I would agree that the life of flourishing is one where you can do the kind of thing you're describing, that, like, being able to do the kind of, like, thinking slowly that you're talking about, I think is central to a good life. But Aristotle and I think, agree it's whether or not you get to do that thing is a result of luck. It's the result of factors beyond your control. And if we can't hold you responsible for things that are beyond your control, we can't hold you responsible for your ability to do that math problem, it seems like.
There are certainly some things that are due to luck, like, what country you were born in or what century you were born in. That wasn't up to you. You just found yourself in that circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
But
what do you think is not due to luck?
I think how you choose to use your mind in the moment. So let's say you are this poor person who was born in some country which has no educational system. Let's say maybe it's a war-torn country and they weren't taught math. Okay, well, maybe doing a math problem is not one of the things that is up to them. But I think there are other things that are up to them. So maybe they could decide on, well, how could I make myself as safe as possible in this war-torn or anarchic sort of society that I was born into? How can I most likely maximizes the chance that I can escape and get to a better place? That's something that someone might be able to think about or not think about, or they could just mope and emote and say, "Oh, woe is me." How
I think you're misunderstanding a little bit my objection here. My point is, let's say there are two individuals, right, in that situation. One of them has the gumption or the grit or whatever you want to call it to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and escape that war-torn situation, and the other one, like you say, mopes around and doesn't do anything and gets murdered by a rocket or something, right? The difference between them, every piece of the difference between them, literally everything you can point to that would explain the differences between them psychologically, are results of luck. Whether it's nature, whether it's nurture, whether it's, which person happened to help them in one given moment or not, any number of things, an infinite number of things that are, like, if they had been different, they would have switched positions or something. Their outcomes would have been vastly different. This idea that there's any part of you that is immune to the effects of luck, even psychologically, right? Like, take the idea of hard work, which is something that people almost always point to as I had luck, but I also had hard work and I made choices, right? Well, the choices you make are the result of luck, and the hard work that you're able to put in is the result of luck. If you had a chronic illness that made you unable to do hard work or concentrate, right, that would be the result of luck. So how could the opposite not also be the result of luck?
Right. So I just disagree that your choices are a result of luck. I think they wouldn't be choices. Choice is something that is up to you. It's contrasted with.
But that's not an argument. That's just like a direct appeal to a definitional intuition, right?
Well, but it's based on introspective observation.
I know, but what you're saying, right, hold on.
Non-luck thing.
But we've acknowledged that there's an illusion of control problem. At least you've acknowledged that, like, introspection can be fallible, right? Like, and
on some things, I don't think on this thing.
So what I would say is, I don't think you have any good evidence for the idea that, like, introspection can be perfectly certain. And even when you do introspect, like, let's go about this a different way. Actually, give me an example of something in your life that you've done that you think was free, that you, like, did this volitional action in the way that you have in mind.
Okay. So I just want to put out this phrase. You think everything is luck all the way down. That was correct. One of the phrases that kind of really jumped out at me in listening to some of your content. So I thought it might be good to put that on the table for the audience to get a sense of what your view is. And I don't think. And
this activity is actually a good way to convey that luck all the way down idea. Actually, if you want to play a little Socratic game with me for a second.
Okay. Yeah. So what have I done that's up to my volitional control in the way I've been trying to describe? I think, well, doing a math problem would be one. Not a really.
Can you give, like, a concrete specific event rather than, like, just a theoretical event? Like, did you do like a specific math problem at some point that you want to point to, or do you like?
Well, I can do it right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I can do a math problem in my head right now.
Okay, so what's your reason for doing it?
I guess it would be to illustrate a point about how I have control over my minds.
Mm-hmm. And what about you as an individual motivates you to act based on that reason, as opposed to a reason where you decide not to defend free will or something like that?
What motivates me to act on that?
Because you would agree there are alternative things that you could be doing right now, but you're doing this. And so I'm curious, what about you as an individual? What features about you cause you to act in this particular way?
I want to, so kind of zooming out, I want to achieve happiness in life. I think that's my highest purpose.
Great.
And I think certain things are the means to achieving that. One of which is pursuing a career that I love. That would give me a lot of happiness.
It's all very good reasoning. Yeah.
And it so happens in my case that I am a philosopher, and part of the sort of philosophical career I want to engage in is to advance awareness and understanding of Ayn Rand's ideas. And it so happens that I recently encountered you, who happens to have a interest in free will, in luck, these sorts of issues we're talking about. So I see in this example, to zoom in even further, is a way of illustrating a certain conception of free will that I hold. So the particular example of the math problem integrates to my entire life in that sort of way. And that's why I'm engaging in free will in this sort of way in this case.
Okay. So all of those things, the like features about you, the fact that you're a philosopher, and like, did you choose all of them at some point?
I don't know if I would say there was a single moment where I chose to be a philosopher, but I had many experiences across many years, positive experiences of enjoying learning about philosophy, thinking about philosophy, maybe teaching philosophy, that made me think this would be a good sort of career for me. Comparing that to, the kind of experiences I have doing other things, which maybe they aren't quite as engaging, or I'm not quite as passionate about them. So I've chosen this one.
Do you feel like you chose to be more passionate about philosophy than those other things?
I wouldn't say choosing. I chose the passion. Rather, it's more that I chose the activity that I experienced passion in pursuing. So this is another place where introspection comes in. I observe my emotional state in doing different kinds of activities. And if I find that one experience is boring, another maybe it's interesting, but I'm not passionate about it, and then another one where I'm super energized and I am passionate about it, then I'm going to go for the passionate one, assuming it's something that I think I can make some money on and can sustain myself at it.
So the answer to the question, like, why didn't you go into being a lawyer where you could make more money, is that like you as an individual are more driven by doing things that you're passionate about than by things that might be financially lucrative?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a balancing act. I mean, you have to actually, I'm not making a lot of money right now as a philosopher, because I chose a non-traditional route. And there are other sorts of ways one could try to be a philosopher. One could go the traditional academic route, try to be a professor in a university. And for a while, that is what I thought I would do. But then I had an idea to do something else, and it was appealing to me. So I decided to take a non-traditional sort of route.
I see.
And by the way, my question if you're listening and you want to help me out, you can give me Patreon donations. All right, moving on.
No, you're fine. My question then, like, it seems to me what you're saying is you have a characteristic, a feature of your personality that you would prefer this passion project to some other kind of thing, even if it isn't necessarily the most financially successful. And then I think the question is, did you choose that character trait, or is that just a feature you've always had that has led you in this way towards philosophy?
Did I choose the character traits of preferring? I don't think one directly chooses character traits. I think one develops them through directly making smaller choices. So yeah, I wouldn't say I directly chose to have the sort of preference I do for a less lucrative career that enables me to spend more time doing exactly what I love versus
Right.
a more lucrative career. Rather, I made smaller choices about what to do in more particular cases, and like how to spend my time in this hour or this minutes. And maybe as a result of those, I came to have a general preference for the sort of path that I'm taking. But I doubt it was a directly chosen character trait.
Right. So what it seems to me then, I would say about your choice, quote unquote, to do the math problem in your head in this particular instance is that that mental action is the determined result of your preferences and your reasons and a bunch of experiences, many of which probably, like all of which probably had factors that were beyond your control tied into them. But like there's this giant web of things beyond your control, your personality. So this is what Nagel means by like constitutive luck, circumstantial luck, nature, nurture. All these things come together to create this individual who's doing this math problem. And that is all the result of luck. That's the luck all the way down. And if you acknowledge all of that stuff, it doesn't make any sense to say, but the math problem was a choice, and use the word choice like it somehow conveys or imbues it with some sort of like radically free power, right? If the illusion of control can exist on a large scale in that way, it also can exist in the individual action by action scale, it seems to me.
Okay, so I just had a thought, which is I think there's a deeper sort of choice than the choice to do the math problem, which I think is the choice to keep my mind in focus.
It's going to have the same regress problem,
And
though.
I would dispute that, but let me just flesh this
go ahead.
out for a second. So I don't think I directly choose my mental content. Rather, I choose whether to engage my mind or not, whether to focus it or not. Do I just allow myself to drift mentally, or do I keep myself in a state of readiness and alertness? And I think having chosen in this case to keep myself in a state of alertness, a relevant sort of example came to mind, or at least what I thought was a relevant example, which is this math problem. Now, if I didn't choose to keep my mind in focus, if I were just kind of drifting mentally, then maybe that example wouldn't have occurred to me, and it wouldn't have come up at all, the math example, and we'd be talking about something entirely different, maybe something irrelevant. But since I have been exerting control, that example, which I do think is relevant, came to mind. So I think the deeper choice is not the choice to do this math problem or not, but the choice to keep my mind in focus or not. So now, if you want to make a case that that choice itself is due to luck, then okay, you can make that, and then we can debate that.
Yeah, I mean, I would be curious to see how you would deflect that kind of. I mean, you would agree that certain people lack the capacity to focus in the way you're describing, right?
I think only if like they're damaged, maybe their brain is damaged, or maybe they're on drugs as a temporary kind of freak.
Maybe they're a small child
case,
like maybe they're in a coma.
Children, I think they have some amount of free will. I don't think they're so exactly where free will comes into the picture. Sometimes people talk about, well, what about animals? What about dogs and cats? Do they have free will? I doubt they do have free will. But I think human beings, even if they're children, I don't think it magically comes into being when you're 18 or something that you have free will. I think well before that, exactly where maybe a newborn infant doesn't exert control, but I would think that even a young child does have free will and can make very simple choices, like whether to look one way or another, whether to.
But you're not talking about just like, it seems to me that you're running together the kind of causal influence that we've already ruled out as not being sufficient, and then lumping that in with some idea of like the ability to control one's mind in a way that the mind focuses, which is a totally separate thing than like, can I turn my head left or right or something like that. And the mind's ability to focus, it seems like, is also, yeah, I think in every kind of way, the result of luck, right? We've acknowledged that like if you had certain kinds of mental or physical illnesses, that would impede or undermine your ability to focus in the way that you're describing. As a randist, I assume you're familiar with Harrison Bergeron, the short story by Kurt Vonnegut.
Actually, no. Someone
Oh,
else
interesting.
referenced that in one of my. Actually, yeah, someone else referenced that, but I haven't read it myself, so I'm not familiar with it.
It's a classic for people who like to make the leveling down argument and say that like socialism or communism will make everybody have to be on the lowest common denominator possible. In the society in question, everyone has a artificial handicap to correct for their skills, their abilities. So, and if you're smart, if you have the ability to focus really well, in that world, they put a thing in your ear that like buzzes every once in a while and it breaks up your thoughts. So you can't have a consistent, you're sitting there trying to do the math problem and it buzzes in your ear and breaks up your concentration, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the fact that you live in a society that doesn't do that is not under your control, correct?
Well, no, not necessarily. I mean, it might be in the long run. Like if you're born into the society, it's not under your control whether you start out in that society, but I think it is under your control whether you end up in that society. So like in the war-torn case, maybe it's not up to you that you were born into it, but it is up to you whether you make efforts to try to get out of that.
And again, we're just going to bounce back and forth between
Yeah.
constitution and circumstance here, right? I'm going to say it's a matter of luck that you're not in a circumstance that causes this problem. And you're going to say, but your constitution can overcome those circumstances. And then I'm going to say, but your constitution is also the result of luck. And then I'm going to give another example of that. And we're just going to go round and round like that. So I don't see how you avoid the problem of constitutive luck by so far as I can tell, your argument has been asserting that it is a choice and definitionally therefore is free or something. So how do you feel like you fix this problem with like the luck regress?
Well, I've pointed to the direct introspective evidence against the luck, and you don't.
But the
you
direct
don't accept
introspective
that.
evidence coheres with the luck regress problem, right? I can introspect all day and say my reason for doing this is this, and I didn't choose that reason. My constitution is this, I didn't choose that constitution. Unless you just mean like literally because I looked inside and said, no, this is actually me. It is therefore actually a free and independent me. But that seems like deeply implausible given the fallibility of our own personal narratives.
I don't see that this thing I'm pointing to introspectively or observing introspectively is the sort of thing that one should have doubt about. Like, yeah, you can be fallible in the sense that you can be wrong about, well, what was it about the movie that I liked? Was it, did I think it had a great plot, or was it good acting, or did I just think it was, the characters were beautiful or something? You can make mistakes there, but this is not
Yeah, I think you're misunderstanding
thing.
What I'm arguing for. I'm not arguing that like you have secret other reasons every time or something like that. Even when you fully know your reasons and the features about your character that caused you to be motivated by those reasons and not other reasons, the combination of those things is the result of luck every single time. So it's not about whether you actually know your reasons or not. I don't like the only part in which I think you're fallible is this claim that you are directly experiencing some sort of entity or individual self that is free of the forces of reasons, right? Like that's what I think I'm not seeing how you sort of conjure that part of you into existence.
Part of you that's free of reasons.
So like for every time you act, right? You act in theory, like even the way you're describing it, where you act volitionally, right? You focus your attention, right? You're focusing your attention because of reasons. You're focusing them on reasons.
I'm not sure. I don't. I'm hesitant to accept that you're focusing because of reasons. I think this is
I thought you said you
can be
built
a
up focus because you want to live a good life.
no. Well, I focus because I mean, if I give a because, it seems like I'm giving a reason, and I maybe in a sense I am, but I think
I think
there's a
you are, yeah.
sense there's a way in which it's not the normal sort of going by reasons, or so I think it's bringing you into the realm of having reasons at all. To like, if you're out of focus, there's there might not be, or maybe there can't be yet, any reasons to govern, to act on. So once
I'm not
you
sure I understand that, because it seems like you can have impulsive reasons. You could have subconscious reasons. You could be an animal and like a non-human animal and act based on reasons, even though you might not be able to articulate them in an abstract form. Like motives, like whether you want to call them reasons or motives, like you have a motive for focusing, and your motive is the result of nature and nurture, and your nature and nurture are the result of luck. So even the focusing itself, even the choice to focus itself, is the result of luck, it seems like.
so I don't agree with that, but let me see if I can say a little more about this point about there not being reasons to make this primary choice, it's sometimes called. So imagine you're just waking up in the morning and you're kind of groggy, and you have this sense that it would be good to get out of this kind of woozy, groggy, half asleep state and get into the alert state. Now
you have a desire and a goal, and you are motivated to do it, and you act based on that motivation, it sounds like, right?
Well, there are conflicting. So it also feels good just to lie there and not to not get up. So you have,
sure, you can have competing desires and goals, but that
yeah,
doesn't mean you're not acting based on a desire towards a goal.
right. So there's something pulling you in the direction of just stay in bed, drifting mentally. And but you also have a sense that it would be good for you to focus your mind on what you have to do today and start your day. And but I've been saying this verbally. I've necessarily, to convey the idea, I've had to use explicit words, but I think there are times when there aren't these explicit words running through your mind, but there's just like a sense that it would be good to do one thing and bad to do this other thing, and that you could go either way. And then it's up to you to make this choice of which way to go.
Who's the you in that sentence?
You could say your consciousness.
So the mix of nature and nurture that decides things one way or the other?
I don't think it's just nature and nurture. I mean, when you put it
what
that
else
way,
is it? What else? I mean, what can there be besides nature, or some combination of nature
choice.
and nurture? Right, but your choice is the result of who you are, and who you are is the result of nature and nurture. It's like you say the word choice like it's a magically causally separate event in some way.
I think it's a separate event. I don't think it's a magically separate event. So I don't think.
How could it be separate? So like, is it caused? Is the choice caused by a reason or not?
I think it is caused in a certain way by a reason, but not in the explicit way. This is what I was trying to get. There's no explicit,
but it's still being caused. It still has a cause, right?
Yes.
It can be an implicit cause, but it's still a cause, right? And that cause is caused by something else prior to it, because all events are caused by something prior to them, right?
Well, I think there can be, maybe an uncaused cause is.
So you are actually advocating for an unmoved mover inside of us. That's what you're saying. Like there's an unmoved mover inside of us that exists.
I think there's plausibly there's something like that going on.
Yeah. So I guess I would say for me personally, I think that's a reductio ad absurdum. Like, I think you've just said, I believe in, magic, right? I think you've effectively just said, I believe in a soul, right? You believe in something inside of us that is somehow an unmoved mover, where nothing else in the universe appears to be an unmoved mover, as far as we know. And then I'm like, okay, but if this unmoved mover, it still has to choose a reason, and it still has to have a reason to choose one reason or another. I don't see how it could be like, if it's unmoved, it's equivalent to me to the kind of random consciousness that also would not be able to sustain responsibility, right? If you're not moved by a reason, you're not a person in the way that we think of persons, like you're a tornado at that point.
Okay, so one thing I want to say to this is the fact that something is unique doesn't mean it's magical. So I do think
Sure, I do
humans
think
are a
you're
unique
positing something
sort
magical in
of.
this case in particular.
I do think humans are a unique sort of being, and part of that is we uniquely have free will. But I don't think there's anything magical about it, just because we haven't seen anything else in the universe. Well, we haven't seen anything else in the universe, build cars and computers and skyscrapers and go to the moon.
So,
but that
do
doesn't
you
mean
think
any of
everything
these
else?
things are unreal.
Do you think everything else in the universe is deterministic except our consciousness, as far as we know?
Yeah, at least plausibly, I think that's the case.
Okay.
Yeah,
so yeah. So here's the thing. I believe that consciousness exists. I believe that it's very, very weird, but I don't believe that it's causally separate from the rest of the universe in some way that makes it separate from the luck that makes up the universe. That seems to be what you would have to posit, that like there's a mental being inside of you that isn't the result of the brain and body and everything that goes into making up what I think of as a conscious being. Otherwise, that consciousness is got to be the product of luck, just like the body is, just like the physical brain is. Like, how does it, where does it escape determinism? Like, it just seems like you have to, like, at some point say, and then there's a consciousness that somehow acts separate from the rest of the universe and is acting based on reasons, but is freely choosing those reasons in a way that is not in any way connected to the passions or motives or desires of the person it was attached to, because all of those things are the result of luck.
Okay, so one thing I want to say is it's not, there is a connection to other things in the universe, but like you need to have a body and a brain that are, healthy and intact to give rise to this capacity to make choices. And if you damage someone's body or brain and give them drugs or alcohol or whatever, they could lose it. So it's not like this is a free floating ability that has no relation to the rest of the universe.
Then how does it avoid the problem of luck? If it is in those ways, as you say, connected to these systems that are overrun with luck, how does luck not spread into this thing that you are thinking of as being separate from it?
I just don't see. This just goes back to the direct introspective point. If you can directly see, you do directly see that.
Do you believe in God?
You are controlling. That's another topic, but no, I don't.
But if I was to say
atheist.
I strongly introspect and say that I'm having a direct experience of God right now, you wouldn't take that to be indicative of the existence of God, would you?
No, but I think that's totally a different sort of thing. Way less plausible, given the traditional.
I think the thing that you're describing is equally as literally equally as plausible, in the sense that they both require an unmoved mover. Like, you posited the existence of an unmoved mover, which is like a classic theistic argument.
Well, there might be similarities, but I think that's in maybe a superficial kind of similarity.
You're describing your consciousness as
the
a
gods
being
are a
that somehow,
projection of human beings. Like, God is made in the image of human beings. Maybe the way people got the idea that God was this way was because they observed it in themselves.
Well, of course they did. But like,
kind
also
of an animistic view of the world. You project your own mode onto the universe,
right? But I can give an evolutionary debunking argument for your belief in free will that is in my opinion, just as effective, but your answer is going to be, but introspection, but you won't accept that answer for other things. So why do you accept it for this one thing?
Well, if I have direct evidence of it in one case, but not another, I mean, I don't.
But you don't have direct evidence of it. You have
I
indirect evidence of it. I mean, like,
I don't think it's indirect.
What do you think that you directly experience when you make a choice? You've made a coerced choice. Have you ever made a coerced choice where you like felt pressured to make a choice?
I'm sure I've felt pressured, but I wouldn't say it was. I don't think I would say it was coerced. Like, I mean, you could put a gun to someone's head and say, you know, give me your money or your life.
Yeah, and in that situation, are they acting freely if they give you the money or no?
In a sense, I mean, not politically freely, but metaphysically, I think you could say, yes, they're acting freely.
Do you think that they have responsibility for their actions the same way as if they didn't have the gun to their head?
I mean, you're still responsible, but I mean, you're not blameworthy if you hand over the money. You have good reason to do so. I'm not. So, you know, I'm not sure what you're getting at, but there's different senses of freedom, which it's important to, you know, not conflate. And you're certainly not politically free. You're not free in that sense, but I don't think anything can metaphysically take away your freedom unless, you know, we're talking about, you know, you do some damage to someone's brain or body and destroy their capacity to make choices.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, I do think
I'm just trying to at this point understand sort of your view, I guess. Like, what are the limits of, like, when is a choice like a choice that counts as responsible versus not? Like, I don't know how to object to your view at this point, because if you're positing the existence of an unmoved mover internal to yourself and your sole argument for it is introspection, I feel like I've done as much as I can to lay out sort of why I think that is not a plausible argument. And I guess maybe we could talk some about like what the different worlds we want look like based on these differing conceptions of who's responsible and where, because I don't know how else to, like, I don't know that, I mean, I think like this is sort of a Russell's teapot kind of situation where it's like, how do I disprove the existence of that little teapot inside of you? I have no way to do that other than to like say, look, everything about you is the result, in my opinion, of constitutive or circumstantial or some combination of those kinds of luck. I don't think you can actually point to anything else, and use it. Just simply saying the word choice doesn't seem to avoid the problem. But unless you have some additional argument you want to present, I think maybe we've dead-ended on that side of things.
Maybe. Let me just say a couple things. So one is, I do think free will and choice are coextensive. So earlier I think you wanted to pull those apart, but I think those are coextensive. So where there is free will, there's choice, and vice versa. The other thing is, I just don't think I think there's something wrong if you're going to say that a belief in free will is in the same category as a belief in God. I think those are radically different. They have radically different epistemic plausibilities to them. So I don't know if there's anything there we can dig into, but yeah, I think that's a big difference there.
I mean, if you are positing the existence of an unmoved mover, that to me is metaphysically mysterious. You could try to explain a bit more about how you think this unmoved mover works,
or maybe
and how it can be more
responsible. Is a better.
I don't know. It's the same problem. It's still the same problem. It's like, you know, you're just spontaneously generating causality out of nothing.
But it's not out of nothing. So it's the nature of the organism. So given the nature,
is the nature of the organism referring to like your body and stuff?
Yeah, including in particular your brain.
Did you choose your nature?
No, but I don't think that's relevant here.
Well, I mean,
given that
if you're saying that
you
it's the
came
result
into
of your
being.
nature and your nature is the result of luck, you're saying it's the result of luck.
No. Your nature allows you. Your nature is such that you can make choices. A dog's or a bird's or a fish's nature is such that its consciousness uh, is deterministic. It can't regulate itself. Whereas I think, the nature of human consciousness is that, it's based on a biology that does enable it
So the fact
to
that, yeah,
have this
the fact that you were born a
self-regulation.
human and not a dog is luck.
Yeah, you could call
Not
it
beyond
that
your
luck.
control, right?
Yeah,
You didn't choose to be born a human.
right.
Right. So if if choice is the result of your nature and nature is the result of the luck of being born this particular kind of entity, then it follows that the choice is the result of luck, right?
No, your capacity to choose, being the kind of being you are, that you could say that's a matter of
Right.
luck. But the
If you don't
particular
have the
choice you
capacity,
make in
then
a
you
given
couldn't have chosen at
case,
all, right? Like you have to have the
sure.
capacity first of all.
But
So
once you
having
have that capacity, it's up to you which way you exercise it, which way, how you
and
use it.
but there again, we go back to the you in that sentence is the mix of nature and nurture, and you haven't given me anything else to look at besides those two things.
Now, I've
Except,
given you choice, but you don't want to accept that.
Well, but I don't think you like define choice for me. What do you mean by choice?
Well, this is an axiomatic sort of thing. You can't define it in terms of something else. It's a sui generis sort of thing.
I don't think that's
it's one
true.
of
I
these
think there are
unique
multiple
things.
definitions of choice. I think plenty of people have presented definitions of choice. So the problem is you're falling back on infallible introspection about an unmoved mover who acts in a way that is axiomatic and so not definitionally analyzable. It closes off my ability to argue with the position because you're essentially appealing to three different kinds of mystery there, it seems like.
There are things that are self-evidence. There's no infinite regress in proof. You got to start somewhere, and one of the places we start is with what is directly introspectively observable. In choice, the ability to control your mind, you can use synonyms like choice, control, free will, but you can't get underneath that.
Choice and control
you can't
aren't
analyze it
synonyms,
into
in my
some
opinion, though. They're different concepts.
Okay, well we differ on that then, and maybe you can articulate that. But in my view,
I think it's a really important distinction. Yeah,
I think these are axiomatic concepts.
okay.
And it's not a slight against them to say, oh, well, you can't put it in terms of something else. Consciousness is also like this. You can't define consciousness, I think, in terms of other terms. It's just a directly observable thing. But, that just so happens that's the way nature is. It's no slight against it.
I guess I'm sympathetic to the idea that there are basics. I just think that these things that we're talking about are not basics. That like there are things that they atomize into, like is a choice, a action driven by a reason? Is a choice deciding between two different things? What do you mean by a choice? Like if you're gonna use it as your focal point for your entire theory of free will, there's got to be some philosophical work that goes into explaining what is and isn't a choice.
Yeah.
Is every human action a choice? But like you're saying certain actions are choices and other ones aren't, it seems like, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think there are like your patellar reflex, that I don't think that's chosen. Classic example of something that's not. Or the digestive or coughing reflex, you could say that's an action that's not chosen. But then the operation of your mind, I think, is something that's chosen.
Every part of the operation of your mind, or only some parts of it?
Yeah, some parts are like some things like the Mary Had a Little Lamb example. That's a case where it's not open to your choice as to what pops up when certain sentence or part of a sentence is presented, but whether you choose to, I shouldn't use that word, I guess, but whether you manage your minds or just let it drift, I think that is something open to your choice. I think that's the fundamental thing, open to your choice.
So I think by what you mean by choice to me is something like causal influence. I can influence what my mind is doing in the very thin sense of like, if I take certain drugs, I can focus more effectively, right? Like, if I take my medication, I can do my job better, kind of thing, right? That is, um, uh, and similarly internally, like what you mean by an internal choice is, it seems like just the action itself, as far as I can tell. Like an action that isn't reflexive for you is a choice always, right? Are there any non-reflexive actions that aren't choices for you?
I don't know. Nothing is coming to me off the top of my head, so
that seems like a
maybe not.
problem. Yeah, it seems like a problem to me, because then you're saying by choice I just mean action, but that doesn't bring anything to the table, and actions themselves are.
No, there are lots of, like involuntary actions like coughing or sneezing.
Well, that's what I mean. I mean anything but non-reflexive actions, right? All of your quote unquote intentional actions are choices on your view, right?
Maybe. I mean, I don't. If I thought it through a little more, I might want to give my view some more nuance. But it might be true that I would say all intentional actions are chosen actions.
Do you think we're responsible for all of our intentional actions to the same degree or not?
I don't know. I mean, maybe it'd be good to get into a more concrete example of an intention one might have. So, like if you have the intention to murder someone, I think that is an intention that is up to you, not directly, but I think indirectly through choices. I think it's a very corrupt intention to have, but I think it's only an intention you could come to have through maybe years of making very bad choices over something you directly control, which is the management of your mind, in my view. If you choose poorly on that issue of whether to manage your mind enough, uh, enough times, maybe over the course of years, you could become so corrupt that you could form the intention to murder someone. Now, are all intentions some things that you at least indirectly have control over and choose? I don't know, maybe. But that, I just wanted to give at least one example to give this a little more concreteness of a case where I think you do choose your intention, but not in a direct way.
Okay, so it seems to me then that like we have to say that choice and control come apart, because if choice is just intentional action, and we think that control needs to be something more robust, and like when I pick up my glass and put it back down, that could be intentional action. We might not necessarily think of it as having the kind of control that would be sufficient for moral responsibility. So control has to be something different than that, it seems to me. Do you agree?
Different than
Than just
intentional
choice.
action.
It can't just be synonymous with choice, because you could have a choice, quote unquote, that we wouldn't hold you responsible for. Are there some choices you feel like that people are not responsible for?
I don't think so. I mean, there are aspects of a choice you're not responsible for, like if you're misinformed about something, like maybe the I don't know, I'm thinking of the Alec Baldwin case where he shot someone on the set of a movie. So maybe it was open to his choice to go through with his job and follow the script and pull the trigger. And in a way, you could say it was open to his choice to shoot the person, but we wouldn't hold him morally responsible for that if he was misinformed. He was told that there's no round in the chamber, and there turned out to be. So I guess that's a case where I would say responsibility
so
is not present, but there is choice.
Okay, so then
So
it would
he's
seem like,
responsible for making the choice that killed the person, but he's not responsible for the result that the person was killed. That would be on the person who, put the round in the chamber.
Right. Similarly, right, take someone whose intention is to murder somebody. Right, the flip side of what you're describing, and they go to try to shoot somebody and a bird flies in the way and the bullet hits the bird. Do you think that we should hold them responsible for successfully murdering the person?
So in this example, the person doesn't get killed because it hits the bird instead.
Right.
So, I mean, you couldn't, you could prosecute them for they're responsible for attempted murder, but not murder, because there was no murder.
But isn't that ethically weird, right? That like the difference between the successful murderer and the unsuccessful murderer is luck in that situation. We shouldn't hold people responsible for things that are luck, but we are holding people differently responsible in that situation because of that lucky external factor, right? We don't, on your view, you wouldn't say that we should hold him as responsible as someone who actually successfully committed the murder, do you? Or do you think we should?
Like, I don't know what an appropriate penalty is. Like, should he be punished the same as if he actually killed the person? I'm not sure off the top of my head. Maybe not. But I'm not sure. It's not obvious to me that there's any moral difference in the two scenarios. I think plausibly he's equally morally corrupt whether he succeeds in killing the person or doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said you felt like, now, do you believe that there are individuals who have there are various terms that are used for it: antisocial personality disorder, sociopathic tendencies, psychopathic tendencies? They jump around on what term they use, but essentially individuals who are, for some reason, have a sufficient empathy disorder where they can't understand morality or can't reason their way into acting morally for morality's sake, any of those sorts of things. Do you think that like such individuals can exist and it isn't like their fault that they are those kind of individuals?
Antisocial personalities. I suppose there can be, I'm not a psychologist. I haven't read much about this, but I suppose there could be people who are just, maybe you would call them psychopaths, who don't have a normal capacity to understand others, empathize towards others. I don't doubt that there could be such people. So,
do you think that they have responsibility?
Maybe of a different sort. I don't know that they would have the same sort of responsibility. I mean, you might still want to lock them up or give them the death penalty, because whether they have responsibility for their condition or not, they're a menace to society, and it might still make sense to do that. But are they responsible? Maybe not.
Okay.
There might be.
If you think
I think they're a very small minority if they do exist.
Sure. If you think that they exist, though, and that it is possible to be one of them, and that it would absolve you of the kind of responsibility that we're talking about here, isn't it just luck that you're not one of them?
Yeah, I guess it could be luck. If this is like some genetic defect that caused them to be this way, to have no normal capability to feel things towards others. Yeah, I think that could be a matter of luck, but I don't think that infects everybody else with luck.
Well, but the problem is, if it is a matter of luck, which it seems like you're not arguing that it isn't, then it does infect all of us, right? Because all of us, but for the grace of luck go I, right? Right, we're lucky that we're not like that.
Born in that condition, but once we are in that condition, I don't think everything is lucky, given that. But whereas you do.
How does the luck not infect the next step in the causal chain in that way?
I mean, I think this just goes back to what we've already talked about a number of times, which I guess we're just butting heads over, which is this introspective evidence that I think there is, direct introspective evidence that I think there is, that we have control over our minds. And you think this is just an implausible, mysterious sort of thing. And, we just disagree on that point. I think it is unique.
I think that you want to have direct
but
introspective evidence of like introspection and direct introspective evidence of choosing in the sense of like the slow, deliberative making of a decision. I don't disagree with you that you have that introspective experience. What I'm disagreeing is that you have the introspective experience of a radically unmoved mover, which is what you seem to be claiming. I don't think you could possibly have experience of that.
I'm not sure exactly. Maybe when you put it as radically unmoved mover,
or unmoved mover, like, like I think you make choices where you like have, do I want a cheeseburger or a hamburger? I'm going to choose the cheeseburger because XYZ. I'm sure you have those experiences. I don't think you have the experience of some uncaused cause. Like, I don't think you could have that experience. I doubt, I fail to even comprehend what that experience would be like.
I mean, can you have I think it's, so when this uncaused cause, like, I'm not I think maybe in a sense that is what I'm endorsing. And in a sense it's not, and it's a challenge to me, at least, to articulate exactly the different senses that are going on here. But maybe there's also this phrase, I don't know if this is any help, but could have done otherwise, given the same circumstances. I think that part is key. I think that exists, that you could have done otherwise, which is
exists
maybe
how?
not. Well, I think that exists, I think, is another one of these axiomatic terms. It just can't.
What I mean
exists.
is could have done otherwise implies like what, the existence of a possible world in which you did otherwise, or like I can claim that I could have done otherwise, but like half the time you wouldn't believe me. So like, why should we believe that you could have done otherwise? Like, to me, could have done otherwise is a dead end, because like we can't prove that you could have done otherwise. And it seems weird to me to claim that if literally every other thing about the prior moment was the same, the idea that you could have done otherwise seems implausible to me.
I wonder if that's because you're assuming that human beings can't be unique and we have to be like the rest of nature. And
I mean, until proven otherwise, like until I have good reason to think that we're not like the rest of nature, I do think that, parsimony and a variety of other things would argue in favor that we are like other parts of nature.
I think could you do that same sort of argument with consciousness? Like,
but consciousness exists in animals. We have consciousness down the phylogenetic scale.
How do you know consciousness exists?
The same reason I know consciousness exists in you, because they came from a similar evolutionary background and they react as if they are feeling pain, right?
Wait, that's how you know consciousness exists?
Wait, hold on a second. Do you think that like dogs are conscious?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. How do you know?
Wait a minute. Well, we can come to that, but first I want to know, why do you think consciousness exists?
Why do I think it exists?
Yeah.
Oh, I actually don't know. I'm a Mysterian when it comes to it. I think it evolved. I think it's an evolutionary feature. Why it evolved and how it evolved is a mystery. I just know that it exists, and it exists because of the way that we evolved and the way that other organisms evolved.
So your reason for believing consciousness exists has to do with evolution?
Oh, I mean, my reason for believing consciousness exists is because I have direct experience of my consciousness.
Okay.
And my reason for believing that other consciousness exists is because it's more plausible that you have consciousness like I do than that I'm the only one who's conscious or something like that.
Okay, so I guess so where I'm going with this is like, I don't see the difference between the way you argue for the existence of consciousness, namely you directly perceive it in yourself, in my way
Yeah.
of arguing for free will,
Right.
which is that I directly perceive it in myself.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think there's a fundamental difference between them, which is I can be wrong about all of the content of my conscious thoughts, but I can't be wrong that I am conscious. This is the basic cogito, right? Like now Descartes is wrong to presume that it means there's an independent self, but he's right that you can't deny the existence of phenomenal consciousness, in my opinion. The subjective first person experience that is given directly to us is undeniable, but I can be wrong about every other piece of it, including all the free will stuff. So that's the argument.
Okay. So there's a kind of self-refutation argument going on with consciousness. There have been self-refutation arguments made with free will, that denying free will is self-contradictory.
Yeah, I think that's false. I think it doesn't work the same. It doesn't run the same way because it's not fundamental to our experience the way that phenomenal consciousness is.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I think maybe it is fundamental to our experience. I mean, I think it's
I don't
it's
experience
certainly
free will.
the way. Well, I think maybe you do, and the way you interpret it is different than the way I'm interpreting it. But I think even many determinists they grant there's at least they call it an illusion of free will. So they're granting they have this sort of experience, but then they go on to say, well, we have these certain arguments like Libet stuff, which overrides our experience, but they don't deny the experience.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is I've gotten rid of the experience as far as I can tell. I don't remember what it's like to experience feeling like I have free will.
Okay. I don't know, like that I can relate to that. I mean, I think it's just like part of being a human being. I think it's just the way human beings are by nature, that they have this experience. So if you say you don't experience it,
choices, quote unquote, right? I act, I deliberate, I do the thinking slow in the way that you're talking about, but at no point am I under the illusion or in any way like tricked back into thinking that like I'm an independent self who's making free choices in a way that makes me responsible. So I don't know what you could be referring to that like is still fundamental to my experience that is somehow present there. That means that I still covertly act as if or believe as if I have free will.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you use this term tricked in there. Yeah, I don't see the so you said you're not tricked into believing on the basis of your experience that you
it's not like when I'm not introspecting or something, I slip back into thinking I have free will or acting like I have free will. There's nothing to suggest that I'm like lying to myself about this. I actually wrote an article about this for the Skeptic Mag, that it's like people who believe in free will kind of just assert that everybody else has an experience of free will. And when that is denied, they will just state that it is the case. And that, I mean, there's no way for me to prove otherwise. That's part of the point of the article, is that like, as with all introspective claims, you can't look inside my mind and tell whether or not I actually believe in free will. But I'm telling you, as far as I can, if you believe that introspection is as reliable as you seem to think you do, I'm telling you that I've done a lot of introspection on this subject, and I do not believe or feel like I believe in free will.
Okay.
But I still do all of the like meaning making and like acting, and enjoying my life and all those sorts of things. I just know it's all the result of luck.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I'm thinking about, how this relates to praise and blame and ought statements, and I don't,
Yeah,
not being a compatibilist myself, whereas I think you are. I know you
I'm
say
not.
you're
I'm
not on
not.
certain
I'm
issues,
not a
but you
compatibilist, but
are
yeah.
on ought statements and determinism. You are that kind
Okay,
of
so I'm a
compatibilist.
moral. I'm a compatibilist between determinism and moral realism or moral truths, but
Yeah.
not free will or moral responsibility. Those things come apart.
Okay. You are a compatibilist on saying that people ought to do certain things,
Sure.
and
If
determinism.
you prefer, we can talk about what would be better for them to do or worse for them to do, but it all comes out in the wash essentially.
Well, I I'm not sure those are equivalent, because I might think it's better for an animal to do something than not, but would I say it ought to do something? Maybe in a sense. Anyway,
Do you think a sociopath ought not to murder people even if he lacks the ability to do otherwise?
no, I think that's incoherent. He can't do
Yeah.
otherwise, but he ought to do otherwise. I think that's incoherence.
So I think that's a misunderstanding of ought implies can. This is my personal opinion about this subject, right? I think ought actually implies moral responsibility implies can, but ought does not. Ought is just a statement about what would be the right thing to do, separate from what one is actually, I think, able to do or not able to do. It would be right for me not to murder a bunch of people, even if I lack the capacity to do otherwise. It's the lacking of the capacity that absolves me of moral responsibility, but doesn't make what I did moral, right? We wouldn't say that if I murdered a bunch of people, it was moral because I didn't have a choice to do otherwise. We would say it was immoral, but it was a tragedy because I didn't have the ability to do otherwise.
I think I would say it was amoral, not immoral, because I think immoral means implies you could have done otherwise. So I think the whole realm of morality is just out the window
Yeah,
if
I
you
think you'd have
accept
to present an
determinism.
argument for me on that one because I don't see why I'd have to accept that framing at all.
Okay. Yeah. So there's a sort of compatibilism um, versus incompatibilism uh, difference between us. Uh,
Yeah, I just think
so
that moral truths are objective and exist, and we can cognize them if we're lucky.
okay. So where do we go from here? Do we
I
have a
don't know.
choice, or is it just determined? I guess we'll find out on the determinist view. It's not up to us.
I mean, I think if we're lucky, we will
If we're
learn
lucky.
and grow from this experience. No, I mean, I think that maybe we've covered, a good chunk of what needs to be covered. We've gone for an hour and a half, so that's probably pretty good. Were there any other topics that you wanted to get to, or any final points you wanted to make?
I don't think there's anything I really want to get to that we haven't already. We didn't really get into the meritocratic. Well, I guess in a way, if you subsume that under the issue of merit, under the issue of responsibility, I guess, and we went into that in a sense. But I think when we originally discussed that in the email, probably I'm guessing you had a different sort of thing in mind that we would talk about, like societal issues of redistribution of wealth, that sort of thing. That didn't really come up, but I not that we don't have to go into that. It's fine.
I mean, I can.
I thought it might make sense that I was kind of expecting we might just be on this very fundamental issue of whether free will exists, in a sense that I think it does, because everything else is downstream from that. All the social meritocratic sort of issues, wealth redistribution.
Sure. Yeah.
So if we're just gonna, if we're just butting heads on this very fundamental issue of whether this sort of free will exists, then I don't know that it makes sense to really get into the other stuff too much. So
yeah, I mean, I can just say at least
with,
that like my preference, my belief is that if you adopt my view, no one has moral responsibility, even though we still ought to do things. And that's a weird place to be in, I know, but it is not an incoherent place to live in, as far as I can tell. And the other implication is no one deserves to suffer, which is really, really important, which means that no one deserves to suffer, you know, excessive economic hardship. No one deserves to suffer excessive punitive hardship, et cetera, et cetera. And therefore we have to radically reorient a lot of our social systems in order to make them more ethical, based on the growing acknowledgement that people are luck all the way down. So, you know, that's where I end up, in a very socially progressive place as a result.
Okay. Yeah, and I would say it's, I don't think it's luck all the way down. I think there are things that are up to us. It's not true that you didn't build that, as Obama famously said back
totally true.
many years ago. I think you did build
reference.
things, and you, depending on what you build, it could be you could deserve praise or blame. You could build good things or bad things, or maybe tear down things. That, I think, that could also be bad or good. It could be part of creative destruction, or forget that. But anyway, yeah, I think people are responsible morally and politically. They should be left free of coercion. They shouldn't be forced. Now using force in a different sense, not like metaphysically forced by like genes or atoms or that thing, but by threats of like violence, whips, chains, guns, swords, that sort of thing. I think people should be free of coercion and have the right to what they produce, and that shouldn't be coercively taken away from them and redistributed to those who did not produce it. That's my view, briefly, on some political issues.
Yeah, fair enough. I think we diametrically disagree, you know, are opposed on those particular things. Yeah, I think no one deserves anything is ultimately where I come to. The concept of desert and moral responsibility can just be jettisoned, and things will be better off for pretty much everyone, I think. You know, I'm for people, you know, some people need some kinds of reinforcement, and I have some compromising positions about, like, if you really desperately need to be praised for something, okay. I don't think it's coherent. I don't think that I deserve praise or blame, or that anyone else does. I think if anyone deserves anything, it's just a life of flourishing, but even that is probably best described in other ways than via the concept of desert. I think redistributing wealth leads to more wealth for everybody. Yeah, anyway, I think there are lots of good reasons why you should adopt this particular worldview, and that actually I think it'll instrumentally benefit pretty much everybody. But yeah, sorry, I'm just rambling now.
Okay. Yeah, so we do have very different views on a host of issues.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe now is a good place to draw the line and bring it to a close. So thank you for coming on, even though it was just a matter of luck in your view, and it was going to happen anyways from the beginning of time before you were even born, and we're going to have this, and you don't deserve any credit because you don't believe in desert, but
correct.
I think you have free will. And so maybe on those grounds, I should say, thank you for choosing to do this.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, and it was fun. I'm sorry if I interrupt too much. But I, get excited about these sorts of things. And even though it is all luck all the way down, I appreciate you making the space.
You have nothing to apologize for being a deterministic being in your view. But anyways, yeah, I didn't think you interrupted too much. I do that sometimes myself. So sorry if I interrupted too much. All right. Well, thanks, Aaron. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Dan. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye-bye.